It's 2024. A woman named Lissy Dickerson is standing outside her home in suburban Maryland. She bought it in 2005. She had a steady job. She had a down payment. She did what you're supposed to do. But at the closing table, the very last moment before she signed, she found out her mortgage rate was 10%. 10%. Her realtor told her not to worry. Refinance in 6 months, he said. Rates will drop to 3, maybe 4%. You'll be fine. She signed. She never got to refinance. What happened next took 19 years. Bankruptcy, modifications that went nowhere, a roller coaster of almost okays and sudden crises, savings drained to nothing. And then in 2024, over a disputed claim that she had missed a payment, the bank foreclosed. After 19 years of fighting, she lost the house. Here's what makes this story different from every other housing crisis story you've heard. While Lissy was fighting for her home every single year from 2005 to 2024, Wall Street recovered completely. In 3 years, to understand how this happened, you have to understand the world that existed before 2008. The early 2000s were a moment of almost religious belief in American housing. Home prices had risen for decades. The assumption, shared by banks, regulators, economists, and ordinary people, was that they would keep rising. Not forever, maybe, but long enough. And so a system was built on that assumption. Banks made loans, including risky ones, to homeowners. But the banks didn't keep those loans. They bundled thousands of them together into packages and sold them to investors as something called mortgage-backed securities, high returns, supposedly low risk. The investors bought them eagerly because the housing market never goes down. And brokers, the people who actually placed families into loans, got paid more for putting borrowers into riskier, higher-rate mortgages. Not less. More. So the entire machine had one setting: make as many loans as profitable as possible, and move on. Lissy Dickerson and millions of people like her were not the point of the machine. They were the fuel. By 2006, the U.S. had $10.5 trillion in outstanding residential mortgage debt. Household debt had risen to 134% of disposable income. People weren't just buying houses. They were borrowing against the houses they had, using their homes like ATMs, and then, in 2006, prices stopped rising. When home values fall, homeowners with adjustable rate mortgages, the kind that started cheap and got expensive, suddenly can't afford the payments, can't refinance, can't sell. The only door left is foreclosure, and millions of those doors opened at once. By September 2008, the crisis was no longer just a housing problem. It was a financial system problem. Lehman Brothers, either 158 years old, the fourth largest investment bank in America, filed for the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. history. AIG, the country's largest insurer, needed an $85 billion rescue the next day. The stock market lost more than 50% of its value in about a year. Washington panicked. In October 2008, Congress passed the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, $700 billion, signed by President George W. Bush. The idea was simple, at least on paper: buy the toxic assets from the banks, stabilize the system, and use part of the money to help homeowners modify their mortgages and avoid foreclosure. Section 109 of the Act specifically required the Treasury Secretary to help struggling homeowners. That's what got the bill passed. Within days of passage, that provision was quietly abandoned. Instead of buying toxic mortgages and renegotiating them with families, the Treasury injected cash directly into the banks. Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan. The Homeowner Relief Program, meant to have $50 billion, eventually spent about $3 billion. And here is where it gets worse. In 2009, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner was in a meeting with Elizabeth Warren, then the head of the congressional watchdog for TARP. She kept pushing him on why the homeowner program wasn't helping people. He finally said this: "We estimate that they, like the banks, can handle 10 million foreclosures over time. This program will foam the runway for them." Foam the runway. That phrase is aviation language. When a plane is going to crash land, firefighters spray foam on the runway to cushion the impact. What Geithner was saying, out loud to a government watchdog, was that the homeowner relief program wasn't about the homeowners. It was about slowing down the flow of foreclosures so the banks wouldn't absorb too many losses at once. The homeowners weren't being saved, they were being used as padding. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve was running its own. even larger operation. While TARP got all the attention at $700 billion, the Fed quietly distributed more than $7.7 trillion in emergency loans to Wall Street. That number wasn't disclosed until 2011, when Congress forced a one-time audit. The banks took that money. According to their own reserve data, they largely sat on it. In August 2008, banks had $2 billion in excess reserves parked at the Federal Reserve. By January 2009, that number was $843 billion. More money sitting idle in Fed accounts than the entire TARP program. Banks were not lending to small businesses. They were not modifying mortgages. They were waiting, protected, capitalized, and earning interest, while 10 million American families moved toward foreclosure. Let's put a number on what this actually cost ordinary people. Between 2007 and 2010, the median American household lost nearly 40% of its owned wealth. It's not just people who lost their homes. That's families who stayed in their homes and watched the value crater. Retirement accounts, equity they were counting on, gone. 1 in 4 households lost more than 75% of their net worth. College graduates who entered the workforce during the recession earned 17.5% less than those who graduated just a few years before. And economists predicted that wage gap would persist for more than a decade. The unemployment rate hit 10% in October 2009. By 2013, 4 years after the recession was officially declared over, it was still above 7%. And then there is Lissy. She didn't lose her home in the crash. She survived it. Barely. Filed bankruptcy, fought through the broken modification programs, spent every dollar she had trying to keep the house she had bought in good faith with a down payment in 2005. For 19 years, she held on. And in 2024, over a disputed missed payment, the foreclosure went through. No savings, no equity, nothing accumulated from 2 decades of payments to show for it. She is not an edge case. She is the story of what it looked like when the system that was supposed to protect homeowners, the modification program, the oversight, the promises, functioned exactly as the people running it intended. Not for her, for the banks. Wall Street's recovery looked like this. By March 2011, 2.5 years after the crash, the major stock market indices were 75% above their crisis lows. Bank profits returned. Bonuses returned. Between 2009 and 2010, securities industry wages in New York rose 17.4% in real terms. The overall economy in that same city grew wages by 0.2%. The biggest banks didn't shrink after 2008. They got bigger, by some measures 25% larger than they were before the crisis, because when competitors failed or were sold off cheaply, the survivors absorbed them. Dodd-Frank passed in 2010 to regulate the system. It was real, it was meaningful, and it has spent the years since being gradually weakened by the same institutions it was designed to constrain. One bank, a single bank, Abacus Federal Savings, was criminally prosecuted for conduct related to the crisis.
What?
And the homeowners? The modification program that was supposed to help 3 to 4 million families ultimately reached about 1 million. It kept getting extended and reannounced and refunded, and by the time the Treasury finished paying out the last of it, the foreclosure crisis had been over for years, like sending the fire truck after the building had already burned. Wall Street got bailed out in 2008. It was back to record profits by 2010. Lissy Dickerson bought her house in 2005, fought for it for 19 years, and lost it in 2024.